we're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's July 19th here in Seoul. I'm Shin-yoon, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Kim Seung.
Good morning, yeah.
Good morning, and Park Ki-hoon.
Happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday.
Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Due to heavy rain pouring down in South Korea, around 1,000 cars were damaged over the past 10 days. Insurance companies have estimated financial damage for torrential rain on car owners surpassed $19 million. This isn't as bad as what we saw last year, though. During last year's monsoon, more rain pounded the greater metropolitan area, wrecking over $109 million worth of cars. South Korean researchers had a breakthrough recently. They found that the chance of having high blood pressure is lower among those who drink more coffee. A team of researchers conducted a study from 2012 to 2016 on some 12,000 adults. There, they found that people who had more than 2 cups of coffee each day had a 16% lower chance of having high blood pressure. And yesterday, a U.S. national crossed the inter-Korean border into North Korea without authorization. He was on tour of the Joint Security Area in the DMZ, short for Demilitarized Zone, the border that has separated the two Koreas since the end of the Korean War. The UN command has since said that the man is most likely under Pyongyang's custody and that it would swiftly work to resolve this incident. Now, here's what we know so far about the last story. The South Korean Army identified the man as a U.S. soldier named Travis King. The Pentagon has also identified him as a soldier that's actually a private second-class rank who has been in the Army since January 2021. He's 23 years old. The AP and other news organizations cited U.S. officials and said King had been detained on assault charges and spent time in prison in South Korea. He was in the process of being sent back to the United States. And the U.S. nationals crossing to North Korea comes amid heightened tensions on the Korean peninsula. Just this morning, Pyongyang launched 2 short-range ballistic missiles towards the East Sea, and this comes only a week after it fired an ICBM. So, Kyun, so far, how have young people, including yourself, been reacting to the story?
Firstly, I would feel absolutely frightened to be, in North Korean custody. And this soldier, he's only 23 years old, so I don't know how he will be feeling right now, but apparently witnesses said he was, kind of, shouting ha 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 while he was crossing the border. So I don't know what was going on in his mind, but I mean, this kind of raised a question for me, how did he somehow not board the plane in the first place from Incheon Airport? And how did he end up in the, what do you call it, to join a border tour group in the first place? So this raises, I guess, more concerns over security issues to see a US soldier just roam around freely in this area. So, but we would just have to wait and see what happens.
I mean, it's not right. He was being escorted to ride a plane back to the United States. Then he made his way to the JSA tour, where he cackled his way to North Korea. North Korea is not a place you can easily go to. But Xiong, it's not the first time that a U.S. national has been detained by North Korean authorities while on sort of this JSA tour, right? So this is not the first time. What happened then, and should we be worried about this year's crossing?
Yes, I mean, U.S. citizens have been detained in North Korea, over history several times since, I think, 1996, including scholars, journalists, as well as tourists. So more of the notable ones would be most recently in 2016, Otto Warmbier, a student who actually died the next year in 2017 after he was released from the North Korean detainment. And actually, private second-class Travis King had been held, as you mentioned, assault charges, and was released on July 10th after serving nearly 2 months in a South Korean prison. So when he was going to be sent back to home to Fort Bliss, Texas on Monday, he might have faced additional military disciplinary actions and possibly even dishonorably discharged when he returns home. So I think he kind of fully knew what he was doing, and this decision, bad decision I might say, might cost the US government extended diplomatic efforts to get him to return to the US, which is going to be a huge hassle for everybody. I think he just made a bad decision in a moment of rush when he was getting sent back home to Texas on a plane as well. So he just probably thought, oh, I'm just going to
Yeah, he's going to wing it. It's a hasty decision that
It really
costs
was.
a lot of diplomatic efforts and nationwide efforts to say. And actually, once he is sent back to the United States, he'll be facing even graver charges, right?
I think
More
so, yeah.
consequences. And that was our news feed for this Wednesday. Let's now move into our discussion topic of the day. Recently, the Seoul High Court decided to reverse a decision made more than 20 years ago by the government to deny a former Korean pop star from ever entering his home country, South Korea. To find out what this is about, take a look at the screen. This is Yoo Seung-jun, also known as Steve Yoo. He's a former pop star who renounced his Korean citizenship and instead chose to become a U.S. citizen just ahead of when he would have had to do his mandatory military service. Since his decision, Yoo had been banned from ever entering South Korea. It was only recently that the Seoul High Court decided to overturn its previous decision and instead ruled in favor of Yoo. The former pop star had filed litigation over Korea denying his visa application. It's not just Yoo that has been publicly and legally bashed for trying to evade mandatory military service in Korea. A lot of celebrities in Korea have been swept up in similar scandals. Every time, they've received a strong backlash. Today, NewsGen aims to answer 3 questions. 1. Are people in our generation for or against Yoo Seung-jun stepping foot in Korea? 2. What does our generation think about people, specifically celebrities, trying to evade mandatory military service? 3. What do young Koreans think about mandatory military service in general? Let's head straight into our discussion. Xiang, why don't you tell us who Steve Yoo is and why he has been in the headlines over the past few weeks for trying to come back into Korea?
Yeah, so Steve Yoo, or Yoo Seung-jun in Korean, is a Korean-American singer who debuted in 1997 and gained immediate fame as a much-loved solo artist. Like all Korean men, Yoo was subjected to mandatory military service, which he publicly promised to enlist in 2002, but then gave up his Korean citizenship to become a US citizen in an attempt to dodge the military's draft. He was born in Seoul, South Korea in 1976, where he lived until the winter of 1989, when his entire family immigrated to Los Angeles, America. He then actually came back to Korea after his demo tape got picked up by a Korean agency, I think in 1996, and then he was then banned from entering Korea under the Korea Immigration Act, beginning Korea Immigration Act in 2002, and beginning in 2015, US sued the government 7 times, including appeals, of which the latest court ruling 5 days ago decided that the government's ban on Yoo's visa should be retracted and cancelled. Now, after more than 20 years, you might have a chance of entering Korea again, which has caused much public debate.
And before we go on to what types of public debate has been going on, Ki-hoon, to be very honest with you, I wasn't too familiar with Steve Yoo. I don't think a lot of youngsters in our generation are.
Difference,
There is a generation.
You're the Gen Z and I'm the millennial. And
Yeah,
I
maybe
was a
that's why.
huge fan of Steve Yoo.
I know.
Oh, back then, Yoo
Big star.
Seung-jun.
So
Yeah.
could you tell us just how big of a star he used to be back then?
Yeah, back then, he was coined the first entertainer to be coined the term 바른 청년. Basically, it just means a young man who exhibits moral integrity, possesses good character, and adheres to ethical principles.
Right.
Like what Xiong mentioned, he grew up in the States, so obviously he was good at English, so he brought that kind of Western vibe into his music and performances, and I loved it, you know? His dancing was
machine,
amazing,
yeah.
Did you have
and he
any of his
rapped in English.
posters?
In my room, yes, I did.
You're a big
I hate to
fan.
admit it, but yeah, I did. And he also appeared in many different popular variety shows back then. And he was also a Christian.
No.
So like all these fans were like, they loved him because he was like the perfect
good boy
multi-tainer.
image,
Yeah, the good boy image. He had possessed all the good characteristics. And in 1998, he was even voted top 3 most liked male solo artists. So it's no surprise the whole nation was kind of shocked and betrayed when he, you know, gave up his Korean citizenship for the American one to avoid his serving in the
He
army.
dodged his military draft, but he was heading towards the peak of his career in terms of
Absolutely,
success,
yep,
as you
yep,
mentioned.
yep.
You were all the way in Australia, yet you
And
still had.
I was a huge fan.
You were a huge fan. And then he was banned from ever re-entering Korea because, as we mentioned, he tried to get out of mandatory military service. Xiang, could you elaborate a bit more about what happened?
Yeah, so as I briefly mentioned, Yoo was to begin his military service in 2002. However, at the end of 2001, delayed his enlistment by 3 months and went on a tour to Japan and US after signing a promise with the Military Manpower Administration that he will return to Korea, as his itinerary suggests, to begin his service. When he actually arrived in the US, however, he denounced his Korean citizenship and applied for a US citizenship with an apparent intention to dodge the draft. So he said in an interview at that time that one of the reasons was because of the short-lived career of dance singers, as he would be around 30 by the end of his 2.5-year service. The public was actually already outraged that he was exempted from the army and assigned to be a public service agent, a substitute service offered to people with poor physical attributes to assist in government facilities such as the subway and tax office. As a result of his act of desertion, South Korean government deported him, permanently banning him from ever entering the country again.
And you mentioned public outrage before. I think the public was really angry that they felt a bit betrayed by this good boy character.
Yeah, so I mean, even before he went on this tour, his final tour, let's say, he actually promised not just to the government, but to the public, going on TV, live TV interviews, saying that, as a Korean male, I definitely am going to go to the army. He even said a few times that he might join the Marines, that he's willing to, put his time into service and everything. And then straight away, he deserted.
He broke his
country.
promise.
Yeah, exactly, which was shocking.
And as a fan, did that disappoint you?
It did. I was very devastated, and of course very disappointed at the same time. But I do understand where he was coming from because, at the peak of his career, he obviously wanted to continue, because going to the army for a lot of celebrities, it's kind of like, just ending their career, pausing their career. And when they do come back, no one knows if the fans will ever be there for them again. So I think it's like, to put it into perspective, seeing BTS members dodge the army in the military service. But they promised. They're J-Hope and Jin is serving their time in the army.
And that's why they're serving there, because they know exactly what will happen if they don't.
So he did set an example, like good or bad example. That's what Steve Yoo did. But for fans right now, they support a lot of celebrities going to the army. But at the same time, we've seen many other celebrities who try to dodge their time in the army, and the list goes on. So.
And every time we hear cases like that, it really does spur a lot of outrage from the public, especially men. So I'm curious as to what the public thinks about Steve Yoo and him being allowed to come back to Korea now, and what do younger adults in Korea think needs to be done against those who try to evade their mandatory military service.
Yeah, I mean, so many celebrities in Korea have definitely tried to dodge the draft, some even going to the extent of pulling their own teeth out to deliberately fail the military physical examination. So military service is an extremely sensitive issue in Korea, especially for public figures, athletes, celebrities, even politicians and their children, their sons, I guess. I mean, for example, when BTS they came to the age that they had to go to the army, there was huge debate whether we should exempt them from the military service because of the contribution they're making to the Korean economy, to the Korean culture and stuff. Yoo Seung-jun was a similar case as well. He wasn't really that well known internationally like BTS right now, but it still applied. So now let's have a look at what South Koreans think about granting Steve Yoo a return pass back home. In a recent survey by Real Meter, with a sample size of 500 participants, the big majority of 64.7% responded that Yoo should not be allowed entry, whilst 23.5% said he should be allowed, and the rest, 11.8%, responded that they don't know or don't really have an opinion about this issue. So as you asked, Ian, on the question on what Korean young adults think should be done, personally, I mean, it's something set in law. It's not whether I think he should be exempted or not. If you're a huge fan, if you're a little boy and you've been a huge fan of Yoo your whole life, you probably think, why is people being angry? Why can't we just let him be? But that's not the case. It is said in the Korean law. If I didn't go to the army, I'll end up in prison in Korea. So it is what it is, I guess.
But I think Steve Yoo was trying to say for 21 years he's been banned from entering his home country, which is unfair because because as you mentioned, there's so many other cases where people try to dodge
sure,
military
yeah.
service. And that's a thing. A lot of people are talking about what type of penalties are appropriate to be for those who dodge military service. What do you think about that?
I think back then the Ministry of Justice just really wanted to crack down on celebrities trying to get away from the mandatory military service, and I think it was just kind of bad timing for Steve Yoo. He became the first target. So ever since his banning, a lot of other celebrities were caught out, and we don't see these cases happen so often these days.
Yeah, not
and
these
because
days.
a lot
they
of
know what happened.
Exactly, and a lot of millennials and Gen Zs, they're really supportive of fairness in society. So I think things have changed a little.
All right, and we asked the same question to our viewers. More specifically, we asked if they believe it is right or too much to ban someone from a country for neglecting their military duties. And we asked them, what do you think about the case of Steve Yoo? And here's what 3 of them had to say. Take a look at the screen. How849 said, I agree on removal from the country for failing to do the mandatory service. The service is to benefit not only the individual, but also the country as a whole. We are here to serve. Black Belt 2000 said, women should be required to serve as well. Equal rights, equal burden. Maypon said, I believe that it's a bit too harsh to ban someone from a country, but there are consequences for actions in different countries. In some places, you can get banned for insulting the government, and for South Korea, military service is a sensitive area. Indeed it is, and we're now going to add a legal perspective to this issue and find out what laws affect people who try to get away from their responsibility to go to the military. We'll include a live interview with a lawyer right after this. To better find out how Steve Yoo's case will go, we're going to include an attorney in our talks. It's Hwang Yoon-gi. He's been on our show once. Welcome back, Yoon-gi.
Morning. Great to be back.
Good morning, Yoon-gi.
All right, Yoon-gi, I'm going to ask you the first question. How was Steve Yoo able to overturn a decision made by the court more than 20 years ago? What was different this time around?
Before I begin, I have to say this is a very contentious and fiery topic, if I must. So before I begin, a disclaimer to everyone, I do not endorse or support Steve Yoo in any way. I did my military service, by the way. So 20 years ago, there was actually no court decision. So I went down the rabbit hole and looked at the whole saga that took over 20 years. So the first court decision actually came in 2020. Because after the ban on entry 20 years ago, Steve Yoo applied for an F4 visa under the Overseas Koreans Act. That was in 2015. He made that request to the LA consulate. And they denied him that request to give him a visa on the grounds that, number one, there was a ban to entry outstanding by the Minister of Justice 20 years ago. And the court struck that down. So the Steve Yoo already won once in 2020 because there was a procedural fault with the refusal to give out a visa because the LA consulate, they just made the phone call. They just told his dad, oh, no visa. So there was something wrong with the decision. So the court struck that down. After that ruling in 2020, Steve Yoo made a second request. So since that refusal was illegal, again, I'm making a new application. And again, that application was rejected again in July of 2020. But this time, the reason was difficult. The reason was different. The reason wasn't that there's an entry ban from 20 years ago. The reason this time was under Article 5 of the Overseas Korean Act, which says that you can deny the visa to people who are detrimental to the security, the public morals, and the general order of Korea.
I see.
Yeah, I mean, but it's not 100% set in stone that he'll be able to step back foot in Korea, even though he might have won this case. So what's the remaining process, and how likely is it that he will be able to actually return to Korea? So
at the risk of this turning into a law lecture, which is extremely boring, I'm going to keep this as simple as possible. So I talked a lot about the visa application. But to be very specific, the application to give out a visa and a ban on preventing a foreign person from entering Korea are two different issues. So number one, Steve Yoo will have to get a valid visa, which is a requirement to enter Korea. And number two, with that visa, he will have to come to Incheon Airport, go to the immigration office, and then be approved. So those are two hurdles that he still has to clear, even if he wins the court decision now. And I think, again, not an endorsement on Steve Yoo, I think this is a great strategy by the lawyers of Steve Yoo, is that the law governing the visa and the law governing immigration are two separate laws, but they have a very similar provision, which is that you cannot grant a visa or admit entry to people who are detrimental to the security, public morals, and the polite relations, whatever. But the legal argument, I guess, okay, this is my personal opinion, but goes, if we have a visa which cannot be provided to people detrimental, how could you deny us entry if we already passed the visa test?
Right.
Again, this is not, tested waters, it's uncharted waters, but I think this is a strategy that the lawyers are going with, and I have to say it's a clever strategy. So we'll see how it works out.
Okay.
Okay, Yoongi, due to time constraint, could you tell us one penalty against those who try to evade military service here in Korea, just shortly?
Sure, yes, of course. So this is a minimum 1 year and maximum 5-year penalty, prison sentence. And this was actually reinforced back in 2016. The penalty was actually less harsh for people who evaded the military service by going overseas. It was actually less. But they increased the penalty to be equal to the penalty given to people who dodged the draft domestically.
I see. All right. Thank you so much, Yoongi. It was a pleasure to hear from you today. We've received so much information from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Yoongi.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we're going to end off by what we'd like to see in terms of Korea's mandatory military service and what type of developments we'd like to see soon. What about you, Kyung? What do you think about that?
Before 2020, the military duration was around 3 years, but now it's almost halved.
Yeah.
So I think reducing the military duration, the time could, I guess, give less pressure to those young men who want to, who need to serve in the military, and of course, to encourage the privileged ones to pay their duty just like everyone else.
Right. It's all about fairness.
Yep.
Right. Very shortly, Xiong.
Yeah, because I've done my military service, I served my time, and it was, it did feel like a burden. It did take me, 2 years back from my career, from doing anything. You can't even legally have an income as well during your military service. So it is quite harsh, especially at the peak of your career for celebrities and public figures as well. I think one development could be, of course, decreasing the time of service, but as some other countries with conscription do, I think it might be a good idea if you could do, maybe 6 months here and there as, like temporary training when you have maybe a break from school or things like that, to actually fit in to a schedule of your normal career rather than having just, 2 years completely taken away.
Right, and these two ideas hopefully will be passed through authorities to actually consider.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. Now, we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Kim Xiong
My pleasure.
and Park Ki-ho.
Always a pleasure.
Now, thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are
News Generation.